The cab let me out beneath the faded green awning of the Rosemire Hotel, wheels crackling across a patch of broken asphalt. I stood on the curb, raw suitcase handle digging into my palm, and stared up at the building. Rosemire had once been grand, or so the gilt lettering over the doors tried to remind me, letters missing specks, paint curling along the edge, one of the bulbs in the old chandelier overhead sputtering with a yellow, tired light. I stepped inside with the automatic caution of someone unused to crowds. The lobby was mostly empty except for an old man reading a newspaper behind a velvet rope that blocked off a ballroom. Faint music played from speakers mounted somewhere high. Where the reception desk used to be, the marble had worn smooth with fingerprints. The air was warmer than it had any right to be, heavy with old perfume and a whisper of mold. It smelled like other people's memories, a blend of hope and faded laughter that I couldn't decide if I found comforting or sad. I dragged my suitcase to the desk. The woman behind the counter had a soft, pale face and the kind of cursive name tag that only comes from another era. Elaine, it read. She smiled, eyes wrinkling in that professional, practiced way. Checking in. I nodded, gave my name, slid over my card. The click of her nails on the keyboard filled the silence. I looked past her to a set of antique brass elevator doors at the end of a long corridor. There were ornate mirrors everywhere, each just a little bit fogged. In one reflection, I caught sight of myself, rumpled suit, tired eyes, the trace of a wedding ring tan line I kept forgetting about. Elaine placed a heavy brass key on the counter. You're in 312. Third floor. I hope you'll find everything comfortable. Thanks, I said. My voice sounded too sharp. I softened it, added, is it busy right now? She shook her head. Not at all. We keep the upper floors closed off for renovations during the slow season. Only the third and second floors are open. It should be nice and quiet. What's up there? I asked, maybe just to fill the pause. Elaine hesitated, a hesitation so brief I might have imagined it, before she answered. Just empty rooms, really. Storage. Old things. She gestured to a worn directory on the wall beside the elevators. The fourth floor, I noticed, was listed, but in faded print. The description was simply, closed. I wheeled my suitcase across carpet with a faded, intricate rose motif toward the elevators. I glanced back at Elaine, but she was bravely returning her attention to a ledger, pencil poised above a blank page. The elevator arrived with a groaning sigh. It was smaller than I expected, with a gate that rattled when I slid it aside. The panel had buttons from 1 to 7, but the 4th was missing altogether. It made a quiet, awkward sense. Why let guests stop where they're not wanted? In my room, everything felt old but cared for, in the way of people trying to keep up with time that moves faster than they do. Rose wallpaper peeled here and there, and the headboard was massive and carved with some kind of wildflower I couldn't name. The window looked out over a city alley full of dumpsters and pigeons, glinting harshly with afternoon sun. I perched on the edge of the bed for a long moment, the old coils complaining beneath me. It was the silence that got me first. I'd forgotten how still hotels could be, between guests, between families on vacation, during the in-between hours of early evening. Even in the city, behind all that glass and brick, there was only my breath and the tick of pipes somewhere deep in the walls. After half an hour, I found myself walking the halls just to hear my footsteps echo against the wallpaper. I laid out my work things, laptop, the folder I'd kept from home, the phone chargers. All of it felt smaller, somehow, in that big, echoing space. Sitting at the room's narrow desk, I practiced smiling at my reflection in the window until it looked natural. But the smile dropped back into seriousness as soon as I remembered why I was really here, the job, the need to be anywhere but home, the press of a bed that didn't feel empty yet. That night, I tried to sleep early. The mattress was softer than I liked, but I was tired and had nowhere else to be. Sometime after 11, as the rattle of traffic faded and the darkness outside went flat and empty, I lay for a while just listening, eyes almost closed. It was nearly midnight before it began, the faintest tap above my head, distant and slow. At first I thought it was the pipes, maybe an old radiator. But then the tapping stretched out, not quite rhythmic, sometimes quick, sometimes slow. Now and then, I caught what sounded like low voices, muffled and stretched, as if they were coming from another room and another century. I tried to convince myself it was perfectly normal, the kind of sound every old building makes. Even so, I kept my eyes open just a little longer, heartbeat quick with memories of nights spent listening for footsteps that always seemed to stop outside a locked door. Eventually, the sounds faded, or maybe I just drifted off. In the dry morning light, everything felt more ordinary. The workday called. I showered and dressed, telling myself out loud it had all been nothing, a hotel's old bones settling, the mind playing tricks on someone who needed sleep. Still, I stared up at the ceiling before leaving, as though expecting to see a crack or water stain that would explain it all. On my way out that afternoon, I passed the elevator again. A young man with a maintenance badge was polishing the brass. I watched the doors slide open and noted, once more, that the fourth floor was missing from the panel. It bothered me the way a loose tooth bothers a tongue. Before stepping in, I ran my hand along the row of buttons. There was no slot or groove where, for might have once been, just a gap, perfectly smooth, as if it had never existed at all. Inside the elevator, the mirrors were taller, showing me from every angle. I tried not to look at myself, but I caught my own uncertain expression anyway. The car shuddered to a stop at 3. On impulse, I stepped out, pulling my briefcase behind me. The third floor was silent, the carpet so deep my steps didn't make a sound. I went down the hall, passing doors that all looked identical, gold numbers, brass peepholes, little paper tags warning about disturbances. Everything felt too neat, too staged. There was a faint smell I noticed here, something floral and distant. I looked down the far end of the hallway, where an exit sign flickered. When I got to the stairwell, I paused without really knowing why. The overhead light was humming, and the metal handrail was cold and sticky. Through the small window in the stairwell door, I could see the stairs winding up to the landing above. The glass was cloudy, but the first few steps to the fourth floor lay clearly visible. Nothing stopped someone from going that way except for an old brass sign, no entry, renovation. As I stood there, heart ticking faster with some unnamed anticipation, it felt familiar. Not the stairs themselves, but the hush, the sense of standing on the edge of someone else's story. I got a flash of memory, another building, another night, standing quiet and straining to hear a voice at the door. Déjà vu, absolute and irrational, pressed in on me until I stepped back, my throat tight. I let myself out of the stairwell, forced a choked laugh, told myself it was just the exhaustion. But walking away, I found that I kept glancing back over my shoulder at that clouded window, almost certain I'd seen a flicker of movement where none should be. The first night, it was easy to blame the sounds on the building itself. Old hotels stretch and sigh when the air cools, pipes glug and tremble behind the walls. I lay in the narrow bed, a blue cast from the weak streetlights slanting across the sheets, and listened to the normal complaints of an aging place. Somewhere above me, something scraped against tile, maybe a chair dragged by a careless cleaner, or a service cart with an unsteady wheel. I pressed my eyes shut, pulled the blanket higher. My phone glowed with 12:10 a.m. when I rolled over. By 12:15, it was silent again, peaceful in a way that demanded sleep. But by the third night, the noises didn't sound quite like a building settling. They came each night with their own precision, always at midnight, crisp and intent, like something starting. I counted down in the dark until that first echoing footstep snapped into existence above me. The walls of my room were thin, covered in faded wallpaper with roses curling up the seams, but the sound carried clearly from the floor above. A gentle thump, then soft laughter, surprisingly light, the laughter of someone genuinely enjoying themselves. For a disorienting moment, in the hush of the room, I recognized the particular shape of that laugh. It reminded me of evenings years ago, the sound of my ex's voice while we chose movies together, happy before we understood how temporary happiness could be. Each night, a little after midnight, it played out almost the same. Sometimes the laughter would be punctuated by a sharp, quiet sob, like someone trying and failing to keep their sorrow a secret. It twisted my stomach, something in the weeping too close and too raw. There were long pauses as if the people, or whatever made the sounds, were listening for something else, too. Always, precisely at 12:15, everything stopped. Not faded out, but stopped, abrupt and final as a hand pulled from a hot stove. Then, just as quickly, the hotel returned to the mute wait of nighttime, the pipes ticking as if nothing had happened at all. On the fifth night, frustration thundered beneath my ribs. I pressed my head against my pillow, but the noises felt closer than ever. As I lay listening, the conversation above changed. I could pick out words now, fragments of sentences. That's when the fear threaded through me for the first time, cold and persistent. I shouldn't have recognized the voices from the floor above. I shouldn't have known the words. But they were so familiar, a gentle, teasing tone, a deeper voice joining in, the beginnings of an argument about something unimportant. They spoke in phrases I had used before, or heard, on ordinary days when my life held fewer shadows. Things like, "You always say that," and, "It's just for tonight, don't worry so much." The realization settled on me, heavy and sickly. Was it just the exhaustion of travel and lonely rooms, playing tricks with my memory. I wanted to believe that, but the pattern was too precise. I tossed in bed, the sheets sweaty beneath me, rehearsing the familiar dialogue in my mind. In the trembling dark, I told myself, "You're just remembering things. Your memory is filling in the gaps." But I didn't quite believe it. On the sixth night, a need for evidence chased me out of bed. I crept to the battered desk, unearthed an old field recorder from my briefcase, and set it on my pillow. Its red I blinked awake as I pressed record. For a long while, I lay in darkness, waiting. Midnight came, and right on time, the noises started again, footsteps, the hush of laughter, the ghostly echo of words that felt pulled from somewhere inside me. I pressed my ear to the wall, heart pounding. When everything ceased at 12:15, I sat up and fumbled for the recorder. My hands shook as I rewound the tape, shivering in anticipation of what I would hear. But as the seconds hissed by, all I found was a thin layer of static and, buried deeper, a rhythmic throbbing, like a slow heartbeat. No laughter, no conversation, no proof of the persistent, living world I'd heard above me. I tried with my phone, too. The result was the same, ghostly static, a bass pulse beneath it, more physical than audible. When I pressed the phone to my chest, the sound seemed to match my own heartbeat, racing and slowing at the same unpredictable times the noises started and stopped. I held the phone against the wall where the sounds had come from. Nothing new, just that same pulse, that same hollow static. I sat for a while, chilled and angry, clutching the useless phone. Maybe I was the one making these stories, remembering too hard and too late. The night deepened, and the city outside fell quiet, even the distant sirens silenced for a few rare hours. When morning drew me out, shadows still clinging to the corners, I dressed carefully and made my way down to the front desk. The night clerk looked up, gray eyes unreadable, as I cleared my throat. "Hey," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep, "could you tell me about floor 4? The room's above mine, I keep hearing things at night." He smiled, but only with his mouth. He glanced down at the ledger, fingers tightening on the pen. "Floor 4 is just storage, sir. Hasn't been used in years, unsafe, you know. Old wiring. Sometimes the pipes make strange noises. You get used to it." His words were gentle, meant to be reassuring, but they were delivered too quickly, too practiced. I pressed. "But I hear actual voices, and laughter." For a second, he looked uncomfortable, eyes darting past me to the clock behind the desk. "I wouldn't worry. We're doing refurbishments, that's all. Nothing up there to fuss about." I left with no more answers than before. When I returned later that day, my hall was empty and silent. But as I passed the door to the fourth-floor stairwell, I noticed something new, fresh scratches along the metal, like someone had tried keys over and over in the lock. I reached for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. As I walked away, the memory of a familiar scent trailed behind me, a mix of lavender and burnt toast, the way my old apartment used to smell on slow Sunday mornings. My chest tightened. I walked faster. At midnight, sleep tried and failed to settle me. When the sounds began again, I didn't even look at the clock, I only waited. This night, the voices were different, slower, more insistent. The words they spoke were private, layered with old pain, phrases only two people, once close, would ever know. "Don't forget the window sticks," one voice called, echo flat. "The keys are always in the same drawer." Another voice, softer, replied, "Why is it always me who remembers?" As the heartbeats in the wall faded with the rest of the noise at 12:15, I stared up into the dark, eyes burning. The ache in me now was more than worry, it was a sharp, creeping certainty that whatever haunted the upper floor knew me with the intimacy of an old friend. When I finally drifted off, I found myself in a familiar hallway. Not the one in the Rosemire, yet not quite different. The carpet was threadbare beneath my feet, the wallpaper peeling in curls I wanted to touch. My fingers curled around a tarnished door handle, cold and pitted, as I pushed open a door marked 404. Inside, only silence waited. I took a step forward, and the darkness bent close, full of the sounds I'd heard each night, calling me by name. Something brushed my arm, thin and warm, almost affectionate. I tried to speak, but no words came. Then, behind me, the door slammed shut. I woke gasping, my chest tight, hand reaching for a door that wasn't there. It was precisely 12:15. Outside my window, the city lights blinked at me in silence. I listened, but the only sound left was my own uneven breath, echoing in the hush, as if I were not alone in the room at all. The heater kicked on again, a deep clattering from somewhere beneath the floor. I'd gotten used to that sound, but not to the strange way the hotel changed after midnight, a space that, somehow, belonged to someone else while I slept. That night, I didn't bother setting my alarm. I knew I'd be awake, listening. The familiar scraping began right on time. I felt it all through my torso, not just in my ears, the kind of sound that settles between ribs. My room felt smaller than usual, the ceiling lower, corners weighed down by a hush that wasn't quite silence. I lay still, blanket bunched against my chest, listening. First the dragging footsteps, then the slow pace of something circling above my head. Already, it wasn't what I'd heard before. The steps came quicker tonight, purposeful. And there, in the moment after, another sound, soft and deliberate, music. A few fragile notes at first, almost under the surface, like someone humming through closed teeth. But as I strained to make sense of it, I realized what I was hearing, a lullaby. Not just any lullaby, but the one my mother used to sing, all those years ago, softer than breathing, something I hadn't thought about in a decade. The same whisper of a melody, off-key, then trailed off into a sharp, low argument, overlapping voices. A man and a woman. My own voice, distorted, echoing a moment I'd lived with my ex, the argument we'd had just before I left, tumbling through the ceiling. It was impossible, so I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just an old radio, some trick of thin walls and nerves stretched by sleeplessness. But I could hear every word. "Why do you always turn away? Can't you just stay with me and finish?" I pressed my palms to my ears, but the words kept coming, muffled as if I stood just behind the hotel door, hesitant, listening in on my own life. My heart beat faster. I stared at the light bleeding around the drapes, then at the red LED digits on my clock, 12:28 a.m. My skin felt tight, gooseflesh running up both arms. I shut my eyes. Even the shape of the bed beneath me felt suddenly different, a familiar contour beneath my pillow, as if someone else's head had lain there a minute before mine. I forced myself up, feet sliding onto cool carpet. My hands trembled. I crossed the room to the narrow desk, where, for some reason, I'd left the lamp on low. The golden spill of light reached the far wall. When I turned back toward the bed, I saw it, a single white envelope, centered just beneath the crack at the door. No stamp, no markings, nothing except my first initial in angled blue pen. I stared for a long moment. Maybe housekeeping slid it under the wrong door. But the hallway had been empty all day. I crouched and picked it up with 2 fingers, as if it might burn. Inside, the paper was thick, folded not quite evenly. I unfolded it. 7 words in the same blue handwriting, "Meet me on 4, midnight. You know the way." A drop of something dark had bled into the paper, rust red, maybe ink. Maybe something else. The wallpaper behind me swayed as the heater cut off. I stared at the door, the words circling in my mind. The 4th floor, I thought. The impossible floor. Every time I took the elevator, the brass number 4 was covered with a metal plate. The stairway door by the vending machines had a fresh padlock last I checked. Still, the letter lay heavy in my palm, proof that someone had been in the hall, that I wasn't dreaming. Or maybe I was, and had been since I arrived. For a long time, I just stood there. I could leave. That thought surfaced bright and sensible, and just as quickly sank. I rolled the letter between thumb and forefinger, then slipped it into my pocket. My heart was too slow, or maybe too fast, hard to tell. The air in the room pressed close. The argument overhead had faded, replaced by the distant, insistent melody. The vague ache of returning to a song you almost remember. I stepped into shoes, still half-laced, and shrugged on a jacket. The hallway outside was deserted, fluorescent light flickering in a cold green band. My footsteps sounded too loud, each heel landing on tired carpet with a subtle hiss. I looked down the hall, every door shut, shadows pressed tightly against the seams. The stairwell was at the far end, beside a vending machine humming low and off-key. The padlock on the door was gone. Only the scarred brass handle remained, shining faintly under my palm. The door gave way with the dry sigh of cardboard. A wash of cooler air rose from the stairwell, carrying the stale scent of the hotel's bones, dust, old wood, and something faintly medicinal. I climbed. My hand dragged along the chipped railing, counting each step, 13 to the first landing, a turn, then 12 more. Footsteps echoed below and above, mine alone, until I paused at the landing just beneath the 4. For the first time since I checked in, the door stood ajar, gold numbers intact. A wedge of gentle yellow light slipped out, pooling at my feet, inviting or warning. I listened. Complete silence. But then, faintly, music again, distant as a memory. Unmistakably the tune from before, different voices now, cycling through the chorus of some long-forgotten childhood show I'd watched every morning at 8. It was impossible, but I knew the words. I never meant to remember them, yet something inside me did. I pushed the door wider. The fourth-floor corridor waited, too clean and too bright compared to my own. Light puddled from antique sconces along the walls. The carpet was blue, patterned with the same curling roses as downstairs, but newer. A corridor meant for another decade entirely. I took a step inside. The door clicked behind me. Instantly, voices flared on both sides, low, conversational, almost like a party behind closed doors. Yet no laughter, only persistent threads of dialogue. I reached for the first door on the right, holding my breath. No response. I put my ear to the wood, and a voice whispered my name, not my full name, but the one only my grandfather used, the one I'd avoided since he passed. It was followed by something like a sigh, a woman's voice, aching with sadness, almost familiar. But I couldn't place it. Each door I passed gave up some fragment, someone I almost remembered, the tail end of an argument, the gentle hush of a lullaby, the scratching of a pen across paper. My chest ached. It felt as if I was being combed through by all the moments I'd tried to forget. Every time I paused, the corridor brightened, fixtures humming as if powered by attention. About halfway down the hall, one door stood open just a crack. I stopped, uncertain. From inside came the cackling static of an old radio, then my own voice again, laughing this time, young and careless. The memory bubbled up before I could brace myself, a beach, summer heat, a woman at my side. My chest stung with an old longing. I reached out and pushed. The door swung open with barely a sound. The room inside was not hotel standard. It was a mosaic of all the spaces I'd left behind. Against the far wall, the piano my mother played for me on anxious nights. Beside it, the battered suitcase I'd kept hidden after my first move out. My old parka draped over a hooked armchair. My childhood drawing taped to the window. Everything looked too real, frayed at the edges, but exactly as I remembered. I reached for the piano and felt the smooth dip where a key had splintered years before. In the corner, a record player spun, and every so often, the needle skipped. It was the same lullaby, warping in and out, thick with static, like a voice trying to push through water. I leaned close to a photograph on the desk. My mother, hair blown wild by wind. How could this be here? That specific crease had only come after I'd left home. I'd tucked the photo into my suitcase and forgotten it for years. I pressed a finger to the tabletop beside the photo, the varnish dented under my touch, worn from recent use. I looked back at the bed. The same blue quilt, tattered now, from the apartment I'd shared before everything fell apart. There was the book I'd read half the summer I split up with Mara, the pages still marked at the place I'd quit. My whole life folded into this room without warning or sense. A pressure built behind my eyes. I turned in a slow circle, trying to understand if I'd left the door open, if I was still entirely awake. The whispering in the hall had grown sharper, more intimate. It felt like being surrounded by hands I couldn't see. On the wall, a clock ticked toward midnight. My heart pounded loud as the seconds crawled by. Behind me, the door creaked farther open. The corridor light seemed to dim. Every object in the room seemed to breathe, as if waiting for me to acknowledge its presence. I stepped backward to the threshold, holding my breath, afraid to let go of the found photograph, afraid to take it with me. The music warbled, slowing. Down the hall, another door shuttered. The familiar voices grew louder, spilling over each other, childhood friends, lost family, old lovers, jumbled and urgent. Each syllable carried the weight of memory, sharpened by longing. I pressed my shoulder to the wall, steadying myself. The corridor pressed close, every door tight with stories I'd buried. I wanted to leave. I wanted to stay. My feet would not move. And so I waited, bathed in the endless, personal echoes of a hotel floor no one else seemed willing to remember. When the midnight sound started again, there was no point staying in bed. The idea of sleep was useless now, so I let the blanket slip from my chest and touched one bare foot to the carpet. I half expected it to be damp. The room always felt thick with humidity after midnight, but it was just cold, gritty with dust gathering by the skirting boards. I sat up in the dark, listening to the quiet crescendo unfolding just above me. A single set of footsteps, back and forth, pacing further than any real corridor should have allowed. I braced myself, wrapping my old robe tighter, and nudged open the door. The hallway's light flickered, a tired gold, painting pale stripes on the worn roses of the wallpaper. There, again, that sound, the floor above, groaning under a weight determined not to be ignored. I didn't bother with the elevator this time. Ever since I'd noticed the fourth floor button was worn but stuck, almost stiff with disuse, using it felt ridiculous. Instead, I took the stairs, hand trailing along the pitted banister as though I'd walked this path countless times before. Maybe I had, in places not quite here, countless stairs in houses and apartments I'd once called home. At the landing, the air changed, a sharp, soapy coldness, then warm again, almost like a body had just passed by. On the third floor, the doors all stood quiet, locks intact. But at the top of the next flight, I hesitated. The fourth floor was supposed to be empty. No guests, no lights. A faded sign on the wall beside the fire door promised renovations that had been ongoing for 2 years. Still, the whispers of music and voices pressed at me, muffled through heavy wood. I pressed my palms to the surface, waiting to feel a vibration, but it was dead, only silence met my skin, the way a grave must feel from inside. But then I heard something distinct, my name, spoken in a tone I knew so well I nearly answered. My mother's voice, stern and sad at the same time. Not the voice from our last, bitter fight, but a gentler one, from the kitchen, maybe, calling me in from rain-soaked steps. The sound of my own childhood, impossibly clear, drifted down the hallway. I pushed open the heavy door. Somehow, it was unlocked. On the other side, the corridor stretched out, but the light wasn't right. Instead of the hotel's cheap sconces, there was a low, rose-gold glow, just like the hallway in my old house when my parents would leave the stair lamp on. The carpet shifted beneath me, its pattern blurring between the Rosemire's wilted roses and the speckled brown runner my father had always hated. The pictures on the wall were wrong, too. For a second, I swore I saw the old oval mirror from my childhood living room, then one of the black and white photographs that had hung in my ex-wife's first apartment. I blinked, and the pictures changed, flickering out of sequence. Shapes moved at the end of the hallways, just out of sight, but so familiar I ached with recognition. The scent in the air shifted, growing sharp with old aftershave and the powdery breath of my grandmother's wardrobe. The floor creaked beneath me, not with the age of the Rosemire, but with the soft, hollow ring of the boards I'd snuck across as a child, afraid of waking anyone. I tried to turn back, but the corridor behind me seemed longer than it should have been, receding into a smudge of yellow light, losing all edges and corners. A voice called from one of the rooms, hushed and urgent. My name again, but different this time, a friend's voice from years ago, the one I hadn't answered the night he'd needed me most. The guilt sparking in my chest felt just as sharp as back then. The urge to go to him was overwhelming, heavy in my legs. I pressed a hand to the wall for balance, only to feel it pulse, warm, almost alive, and then turn suddenly cold. The surface beneath my palm shifted, the familiar floral wallpaper slicked beneath suddenly smooth, painted boards, slick plastic, then the velvet texture from the den my ex-wife had decorated and I'd spent so long avoiding after she left. Every step deeper into the corridor was like circling inside a shell made from places I'd left behind. I heard laughter, the low sound of jazz on a Sunday morning, the scrape of plates over tile. Then, beneath all that, the one thing I truly feared, my own voice, arguing, sighing, regretting, always apologizing too late. Every regret I'd ever packed away, chipping at my thoughts, restless in the dark, became clear and sharp in the air around me. The voices seemed to flow from every door, rising and falling as I walked. The hallway forked and twisted, familiarity turning to distortion. The walls leaned, swelling close, pushing me forward. I saw glimpses of myself in every surface, my childhood face in the wash of a mirror, older and lined in the bevel of a polished cabinet. The edges overlapped, my young and adult selves flickering, superimposed, sharing the same sunken eyes. I stared at my reflection, not sure if I was looking backward or forward. It watched me too, blinking in sync with my dread. I pressed on, hoping that if I could just reach the end of the hall, the feeling would pass. The doors multiplied, some with brass numbers from the Rosemire, but others marked with familiar scrawls, my old apartment number, the house I'd lost when I left, once scribbled in childish hand. Some doors shook with muffled crying, others with laughter so brittle it made the hairs on my arms rise. The cold deepened, breath blooming white in the hall. I hugged myself tighter, fighting the urge to press my ear to each door, to open just one and confirm my memory. I knew what I'd find, a version of myself on the other side, trapped in a moment I never got to change. My regrets, old and new, drifting through the floor, made physical with every echo. Somewhere, a clock chimed once, twice, continuing in that same heavy, deliberate rhythm I'd heard for nights. The shadows on the wall pulled long, then split, making the corridor seem at once too short and infinite. The feeling of being watched thickened, not cruel or threatening, just relentless, like the past itself was waiting for acknowledgement. The warmth turned to biting cold. I reached a door with no number, its knob stained and pitted with age. I touched it, and my skin prickled as if woken from a deep sleep. From inside, a soft humming began, my father, humming the lullaby he'd sung on the nights I pretended not to need comfort. I leaned close, heart racing, feeling every old guilt coil tight, every longing I'd starved wake up, reaching through the wood. But the sound wasn't quite right. It wove through every memory, threading together longing so strong it ached. It wasn't only my father, I heard my own voice, and my mother, and my ex-wife, and all the voices I'd carried with me, their hopes for me, disappointments, and all my wishing I could have been better for them. The air throbbed with all I wanted to say. Regret. Love. Everything. The noise built, not louder, but denser, until I felt wedged in the corridor, nearly unable to breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut. The voices stopped. There was only my own pulse, kicked up in my ears. I opened them, expecting the corridor, the doors, to be gone, replaced by empty scaffolding, peeling wallpaper, and abandoned space. But it all stayed exactly as it had been, familiar, lived in, impossibly intimate. A faint ringing started, thin and low, as if from a phone just inches out of reach. Layers of memory pressed on me. I turned, desperate, searching for a way out. The walls pressed tighter, then at once let go, snapping outward into a wide, gray lobby. For a moment I stood in the silence, disoriented, unsure how I'd gotten there. A draft curled around my ankles. I was back in my room. The sheets clung damp to my legs. The clock on my phone glowed 12:15. For a while I lay perfectly still, staring at the patterns the city lights made on the ceiling. Had I left my bed? My body buzzed with exhaustion, skin still chilled. I listened, for footsteps, voices, the soft chase of music. Nothing. Only the regular hum of the hotel's innards, as dull and distant as before. Still, the certainty lingered, filling me with a heavy tension. For all that ought to have been resolved, nothing was. My throat ached with words I hadn't spoken. When I finally swung my legs to the floor and left for the lobby, I passed the elevator. The old panel looked the same until my eyes landed right where they shouldn't, the string of numbers. 1, 2, 3, 5. No fourth floor button anymore, just a blank gilt square where there should have been something familiar.